Welcome. This is your introductory mental health nursing, chapter 6, Dynamics of Anger, Violence, and Crises. And I really want to, before I get into this presentation, let you know that this is a major trigger warning. I know for me, as I grew up in a household that we experienced domestic violence, this was a tough lecture for me to kind of get through and put together. And so I really want to make sure that everyone, before they view this video, understands that there may be some triggers here. I want to also mention that as nurses, we have the mandatory obligation to report any abuse of children and any abuse of the elderly. That's really important. The other thing that I want to make sure that is clear before I get into this presentation is that we understand the different resources that are available to us in Hampton Roads for individuals that may be survivors of domestic violence. We do have the Samaritan House. Many churches also have resources available for those that are survivors of intimate partner violence. We also have 988, which is a suicide and crisis lifeline. There's also the Veteran Crisis Line as well. There are many resources that are available for those that are in a domestic violence situation. But really important is that you understand that nurses are mandatory reporters of child abuse and elder abuse. If you have someone that is not in any of those two categories, we have to be careful because we cannot tell the patient you should leave the situation because we don't know all of the details. But again, if there is danger of a child, danger of a geriatric patient, we are mandatory reporters. That's really important. And I just wanted to make sure that I let everybody know that there's a trigger warning for these PowerPoint slides, as well as the video that I'm about to show, and that there are resources out there. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into our video first.
Hey guys, welcome back to my vlog. I got flowers today. No, it's not my birthday or anything special like that. We had an argument last night, and he said a lot of cruel things that really hurt my feelings, but I guess he's sorry because he got me these flowers today. I got flowers today. No, it's not our anniversary or any other special day. Last night he threw me into a wall. And choked me. And then beat me till I passed out. I woke up bloody and bruised all over. It was actually a nightmare. I guess he is sorry though, because I got these flowers today. I got flowers today. No, it's not Mother's Day or any other special day. Last night he beat me again and again and again. It was worse, much worse than any other day before. He wanted to sleep with me, and I'm on my period, so I wasn't up for it. A couple of kicks, punches to the face, and he had his way. I got flowers today, and today is actually a very special day. It's the day of my funeral. Last night he beat me to death. If only I had the courage and the strength to leave him, maybe I wouldn't have gotten flowers today.
All right, so that video I think was a strong, impactful kind of video. That's why I chose that video. It really gives you a point of empathy so you can identify with the patient. This is really serious. As nurses, I want you to again understand that we are mandatory reporters of child abuse and elder abuse. And if someone that is an adult is involved in this kind of intimate partner violence, we have to be very careful. We have to be non-judgmental, careful how we provide the resources, because if you give a pamphlet, if you give any information, that individual patient may take that pamphlet, and then when they are with that abuser, the abuser may go through their things and find the resources, and that could turn into an escalation and an incident. We should be non-judgmental and don't say, oh, well, if I were you, I would leave him. You don't know the circumstances. And that's something that's really important. I know I'm kind of repeating this, but it really bears repeating. We always want to be empathetic with our patient and try to put ourselves in their shoes. We don't know how the person got into this situation. And the role of the nurse is to provide information and to look out for those red flags. But we'll get into those. But I just wanted to say that up front because this is really important when we talk about this kind of topic. All right, let's get into it now. Okay, so anger and aggression. Okay, so let's define anger. Anger is an emotion triggered in response to threats, insulting situations, or anything that seriously hampers the intended actions of an individual. In one sense, anger is a natural adaptive response needed for survival in the face of a threat or danger. So it's a human response to become angry. Now, in most instances, however, the reaction may be directed at a specific person or in a generalized sense towards a group or even towards society itself. Anger can build into bitterness, and it becomes an unconscious hurt that breeds the desire to get even, to get revenge. These negative feelings are often expressed through hurtful words or actions towards another individual. These feelings can also be self-directed, resulting in varying degrees of guilt, anxiety, and depression. A mild form of anger may be described as an annoyance that, if provoked, can escalate into a more volatile state. Anger can also be expressed aggressively, either verbally or non-verbally, in the form of hostility, or it can spiral to intense anger or rage that may result in violence towards the subject. Okay, let's talk about trait anger. Okay, trait anger. Oh wait, let me go back 1 second. Okay. Okay, aggressive behavior, that's what I wanted to touch upon. Aggressive behavior is not acceptable. It's not an acceptable way for someone to have an outlet for their anger. Okay, so I want to make sure that we state that that is not acceptable for patients or in society. We should not normalize anger and aggressive behavior. Okay, let's now go to trait anger. Trait anger is often referred to as a general biological leaning towards a volatile personality that may be described by the person themselves as quick-tempered. They may feel themselves becoming hot, seeing red, feeling their heart rate accelerate, behavior that reflects a quick response of irritation and fury. The individual with this type of personality typically has a habitual response to frustrating circumstances that trigger a negative social outcome. They may have difficulty interacting or encountering new relationships or social situations without preformed opinions or biases. This makes it more difficult to avoid conflict and tense atmospheres when you're working with individuals that have this trait anger. Okay, while those with low trait anger may be able to compromise and develop longer solid relationships. Okay, an individual who is easily frustrated and angered usually has a history of being irritable, touchy, and quick-tempered from an early age. Okay, so that's important to, again, if we have children, to kind of identify these things and help them with coping mechanisms, help them with breathing, grounding mechanisms so they can deal with and process their anger. All right, let's talk about expressing anger and resentment. So both anger and resentment originate in the person's mental perception of the situation. This perception usually includes feelings of being wronged, ignored, cheated, or abused in some way. When an individual feels insulted, their reaction generates the need to fight back. This unconscious frustration becomes their private battle within the mind where emotions follow the thoughts. Anger can be used in a manipulative way to cause emotional reaction in another to get them to act in accordance with the thinking of the angry individual. So they always say it takes two to tango. So if a person is angry, they may kind of provoke or try to provoke the other individual. And so sometimes your patients may try to provoke you. So again, I want to re-emphasize how important it is for us to be de-escalatory, maintain a neutral face, a neutral position, not raise our voices, right? Those are all things are important, especially when we're dealing with patients that suffer with anger issues. Okay, now often perceptions of anger are formed during the vulnerable years of childhood, and the perceptions carry over through one's lifetime. In other situations, such as cases of intimate partner violence, which is abbreviated as IPV in your textbook, rape and abuse can instill the desire for retribution. Suppressed over time, the hurt turns into resentment and is often expressed in a destructive means of resolution. Effects of anger can include clouded assessment of the situation, a change in focus, energy depletion, creation of painful emotions, and a destruction of teamwork. Concealed hurt is often turned inward, resulting in depression. It can also be a reason someone becomes involved in an unhealthy relationship. Suppressed or concealed anger can lead to both physical and psychological disorders. Okay, very important to understand that. So let's talk about hostility. Anger-based aggressive behavior is termed hostility, or an intense feeling of animosity towards someone or something. So it's like extreme hatred. Hostility can be a precursor to a confrontation, which can result in physical aggression and violent behavior. Aggression can include behavior that may result in both physical and psychological harm to oneself or another person that can occur both verbally or non-verbally. Violence is an expression of anger or resentment in an attempt to maintain power in a situation or relationship. This may be related to a misconstrued belief of entitlement, manipulation, rationalization, or indifference towards the feelings of another. Okay, so given that this individual may have feelings of being wronged, and they may now have the feeling of, okay, now I need to get even. I need to retaliate. This bitterness and anger can send a patient or an individual into aggressive overdrive. And in this emotional state, the individual is capable of inflicting harm on another person or themselves. Sometimes we'll hear people say, I was so angry, I was seeing red. This person that is fueled by this hostility, this anger, filled with aggression, filled with violent thoughts, they are not a safe person to be around. Okay, that's something that as a nurse we have to be able to recognize if our patient is escalating. And the big thing, as well as for nursing students, is if you see this, immediately leave that area. Never corner yourself into a corner or back yourself into a corner. Always look out for a means of escape. Sometimes patients take a period of time to escalate, but sometimes it can happen within seconds. Something may trigger that patient to, become aggressive and to become violent. So as a student, be very careful and be mindful. This is not a time for you to be kind of daydreaming when you're in these kinds of clinical kinds of areas. And also, always look for a means of escape. Find your clinical instructor. That's going to be really important. Okay. All right, let's continue. So let's talk about, we've talked a lot about anger and aggression, and we probably visualize some of the negative things that can happen, but how do we help our patients kind of control this anger? Okay, what do we do? Well, we're looking at constructive methods. Okay, so as humans, we have the instinct to act in aggression when we are angry. Okay, now that's not going to be acceptable, right? We want to teach our patients, how do I manage this anger in a positive way? Okay, so what can I do? Okay, well, first of all, we have to figure out what makes you angry. What are some of the things that kind of trigger you to become angry? Okay, and then how do you react when you're really angry? So we have to do the assessment piece, right? And we have to kind of ask the patient these questions. What makes you angry? How do you feel when you get angry? We have to identify these triggers and how the patient is feeling. And that's going to be one of the ways, the initial way that we start working with the patient. So once we understand what makes them angry, and how they feel when they're angry, we can start to restructure their thinking. Okay, we can think about the feelings that they have, and we want them to be able to express their feelings by using what's called assertive language. Okay, and so assertive language is standing up for themselves, but they're going to be using I statements. So they can say something, I felt angry when my friends did not invite me to the party. I felt angry when I was not asked out on a date. I feel angry when the teacher did not compliment my work, right? So these are assertive kinds of statements using I. Okay, and assertion is standing up for your rights, right? An individual's rights, beliefs, or values in a way that does not hurt others. That's going to be key because we don't want to hurt others, right? So this demonstrates a form of respect for oneself and for those whom the individual is interacting. Okay, so that is going to be assertive behavior. Okay, that's going to be important. When we use these I statements, it allows for feelings and thoughts to be expressed in a way that avoids attacking the other person. We never want to attack someone. That's not going to have a positive or a constructive outcome. Okay, and we have to teach our patients this. Okay, so so again, when we have our patients that have anger, we want them to be constructive. We want them to restructure their thinking. We want them to use assertive language, I statements. We want them to be able to express their feelings. And sometimes, let me just go back one slide because this is important. Sometimes you may want the patient to have physical activity. So if you see a patient that is angered, and is starting to escalate, take that patient out for a walk, right? And of course, this is an NCLEX kind of scenario. As a nursing student, you're not going to be taking patients out for a walk, and you're not going to be alone with patients at all. Okay, that's not going to be safe for you. But one of the NCLEX kind of concepts is the nurse is going to take that person for a walk around the courtyard or something like that, because that physical activity is a way of managing their anger. So you may see them take a walk, they may jog, they may play tennis or a game of volleyball. This patient that's angered, this isn't a patient that you're going to want to play spades with or dominoes, or, do something competitive in that, kind of environment, because that's only going to fuel them more, right? Because sometimes dominoes and spades can get pretty, pretty aggressive. Okay. So just giving you these ideas, because if you see it on your NCLEX kinds of questions, you want to be able to think this through. Because if the patient is participating in this physical activity, they're using their energy, that anger energy, in a constructive way rather than making it an emotional outburst. So that's really important. So if you see those NCLEX concepts, you see it in a test question, NCLEX question, those are the choices that you should choose. Okay. Again, constructive way to deal with anger, restructure thinking, physical activity, using assertive language, those I statements, expressing feelings. And then lastly, forgiveness. When you forgive someone, or when someone, an individual forgives another, it's not for the person that has wronged them. It is for the individual, because this is how that individual that feels that they have been wronged is able to put those feelings aside and move on. So that's going to be important. Okay. All right, let's get into bullying. So violence and aggression can also manifest as bullying, which is psychological harassment or physical confrontation used repeatedly to intentionally bring harm or humiliation to the one seen as weak or different. Now, bullying can occur in person. It can occur online, such as cyberbullying. And we see this, unfortunately, way too much in our society. Many individuals who are bullied, either in person, right, or online, it can result in mental illness. It can result in suicide in the victim. It can result in these individuals being the one that's a perpetrator of a mass shooting. So this is pretty significant, and we need to be able to pay attention to this. As LPNs, you can be school nurses, right? As nurses, we can be nurses within a school setting. So we need to be able to identify these kinds of activities, these kinds of behaviors. In the NCLEX world, you may see a question like the high school student says they don't like me and I don't like them either. That's a big red flag. I'm concerned about this individual lashing out in a violent way. I'm concerned about them possibly committing suicide. So those are all kind of red flags that you need to look out for when we think about mental health, we think about bullying. Okay. So bullying, 1 out of 5 students report being the victim of bullying. Male students report being victims of physical bullying more than female students. And female students report being bullied more by social means. That makes me think of the movie Mean Girls, right? So I actually haven't seen the movie, but I could just by the title kind of guess what it's all about, right? So again, um, other things to think about with bullying is that the types of cyberbullying most often reported are harmful comments and rumors spread online. There is a new kind of cyber abuse that's taking place. It's a blackmailing kind of cyberbullying that unfortunately a lot of young men are falling victim. And actually, there were 2 men in Nigeria were actually, I think, charged because somehow a young teenage boy had got onto the web, the dark web, and he was approached by someone he thought was maybe another young man or a female, and sent pictures of himself without any clothes on. And then it quickly turned very dark, because then they said, okay, now you will send me money or I will expose you because you have sent me these pictures. And so we have a few instances that I'm aware of that I've seen in the news that these individuals end up committing suicide. So it's pretty serious. So this kind of cyberbullying, it's a crime. They're taking advantage of young people. I think as school nurses, we should be educating our students and letting them know that, once something is on social media, once something is out there, even if you delete it, it's still out there. The other thing is that, okay, if they, send nude pictures of themselves, or if they get into this compromising situation, nothing is worth them taking their life. They have resources, they have people that will help them. So that's why it's so important for us to be non-judgmental, okay? All right, other things that you can see when we talk about bullying, LGBTQ students report being bullied because of their sexual orientation or gender expression and feel unsafe at school. We have to look out for that. Your school nurses, please look out for that. Okay, bullying has also been linked to mental health issues that we mentioned. Peer supportive actions to bullying, right? So spend time with that person that's being bullied, right? Maybe nobody wants to sit with that one person. Maybe, okay, children can learn, okay, let's befriend this lonely person or this person that's alone. That can maybe change their lives. That can change the trajectory of the outcome of the situation. Okay, so bullying. All right, let's talk about intimate partner violence. Okay, intimate partner violence and abuse. It's seen in all social, economic, and educational levels and can affect anyone regardless of gender, ethnicity, race, religion, income, sexual orientation, and age. The effects leave the victim with a sense of fear and hopelessness that is often shrouded in secrecy caused by intimidation from the abuser. Children who grow up in families where abuse and violence are common experience led to these behaviors being the model for them, right? And then as they become adults, they either become an abuser or a person that is experiencing the abuse. So when we talk about intimate partner violence, okay, it's not just husband and wife, right? We have a lot of different scenarios that we can see. It could be two wives, it could be two husbands. Yeah. So we really want to understand it's not just man and wife. And it's not necessarily the wife that is always the one that is abused if it's a male and female relationship. The wife could be the one that is the abuser, and the husband could be the one that is being abused. So we have to keep an open mind, okay? So intimate partner violence is a pattern of behavior displayed by a current or former intimate partner using physical or sexual violence, psychological intimidation, aggression, or stalking. Intimate partner violence was previously called domestic abuse or domestic violence. The abuser, formerly called the batterer, inflicts harmful or offensive conflict or abuse upon their partner. The abuser gains power and control. Two key words that you're going to see again and again: power and control. Okay, power and control. And this is through violence, and this causes the partner to be fearful and intimidated. The violence can take the form of threats or emotional, physical, economic, or sexual abuse. It is estimated that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have experienced some form of intimate partner violence. Okay, so when we think about this, we think about there's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and stalking. So what is physical abuse? Intentional injury to another person. That can include slapping, pinching, choking, scratching, stabbing, shooting, and homicide. Okay. Emotional abuse. This is psychological trauma. Nonverbal language can be used. You criticizing, demean, humiliate the other person. Each incident further deteriorates the self-esteem of the victim. The one that is abused feels that they are responsible. They may feel guilty, okay? And so that's unacceptable, right? Sexual abuse or rape often accompany these other forms of abuse and refers to any behavior using force or unwanted sexual acts that are inflicted on an unwilling participant. And lastly, there's stalking. So this is harassing, threatening phone calls, emails, texts, voicemails. So again, when we think about intimate partner violence, we think of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and stalking. I'm going to share with you a story that I recently saw and read about in the news. And it was one of the most horrific cases that I have ever really read about. Okay, so again, this is a trigger warning. It was a woman in France, and I believe she was married to her husband for almost, I want to say 50 years. She had 3 children, and what was happening is her husband was actually giving her sleeping pills or tranquilizing her. And so she would go into periods where she would be sleeping and being unable to be aroused. And her husband, of decades of marriage, went on the dark web and solicited individuals to sexually assault her while he recorded and took pictures of this assault over years and years and years. And amazingly enough, the only reason that this was discovered was that the husband was caught by the police taking pictures of a woman's private areas, I guess in a public setting. And then they, got the right to search their home, search his computer, and they found a folder labeled abuse. And he had recorded and kept all of the files of what he had did to his wife. So now, this is horrific. And you're probably wondering, how did she not know this was happening, right? That's not for us to really, go through. But the fact that this did happen, and this happened in France. I don't know if I said that in the beginning, but this happened in France. And it is one of the most horrific cases you could possibly imagine, that someone that she loved abused her in this horrific way. Again, I share this terrible story with you because as nurses, we may have patients share with us things that are quite shocking. And even if it's shocking to you, you want to try to maintain your composure and support the patient in that moment that they're sharing with you, because this might be the first time that they're ever expressing this abuse has occurred. So you want to be therapeutic, you want to be non-judgmental, you want to keep that neutral face, even if they're telling you something as horrific as what I just shared with you. I know that's not easy, right? I don't know if I would necessarily be able to maintain a neutral face if my patient was that 70-plus-year-old woman that I just described from France. But that's something that's really important, that we don't blame the patient, we support the patient, we're non-judgmental, we maintain that therapeutic stance. That is very, very important, okay? So there's certain risk factors when we think about patients that are abused. We know that pregnant patients are at greatest risk for suffering abuse. Okay. So there is a cycle of violence and abuse. And abusers, they usually don't start the relationship with violence. It makes me think of the movie Pretty Woman by Julia Roberts. That's a really old movie. Maybe, I don't know if anybody in this generation has seen it, but that was a great movie depicting what happens. So there's this cycle of what happens, and the abuser will shower the individual with love, flowers, chocolates. They will be so romantic. They will do everything. And then something changes. I didn't like the food that you made for me. I didn't like the dress. I saw you looking at another person. Something triggers them, and then there's violence that erupts, and it can be very unpredictable. It can be sudden. Okay. I think that we're doing a better job these days talking about narcissistic kind of relationships, gaslighting. That's another thing that we're seeing, right? So some of the things that we need to think about is factors of abuser. Okay. So risk factors. Who might become an abuser? Someone who has a family history of violence. Okay. Someone who has a family history of violence, someone who has a history of physical or emotional abuse as a child, someone using excessive drugs or alcohol, someone with low self-esteem, someone that has poor impulse control or behavior control, an anti-social person, right? If they have antisocial beliefs and attitudes, if they have social rejection, there's economic stress, like losing their job. Okay. Protective factors that can prevent an individual from becoming an abuser. If they have an intolerant attitude towards deviance, if they have a positive self-esteem, if they're highly developed in their social skills, if they have realistic expectations, if they have constructive coping strategies and religious beliefs. So those protective factors, again, help an individual from becoming an abuser, even if they were abused or they witnessed abuse as a child. And again, those protective factors are intolerant attitudes towards deviance. They have a positive self-esteem. They have constructive coping strategies, religious beliefs, and they're connected to family and friends. Okay, these are all important things. So traits that are exhibited by these abusers, they're moody, they can be overly controlling, they can be overly sensitive to criticism, they're power seeking, overly competitive, they blame others for their problems or feelings, they expect others to meet their needs or to wait on them. There's frequent arguing, cursing, or physical fighting, verbal threats against others, a history of degrading or putting down women. And it can also be men as well. Warning signs of an abusive partner. Okay, so these are the things that we kind of have to look out for. Okay, is my partner potentially abusive? Excessive jealousy, right? Being possessive of the partner's time, belongings. If they have a temper that's set off by minor inconveniences, if there's verbal abuse, yelling or calling their partner names, if they're controlling all the household finances, blaming the victim for anything that happens, demeaning the victim in private or publicly, cruelty to animals, okay? These are all things that are going to be red flags, warning signs of an abusive partner. In the nursing and healthcare setting, you may see a patient that comes in, but the partner is the one that does all the talking. The patient doesn't answer the questions. Okay, so that's another red flag for us to look out for as nurses. Okay, so I want to talk about the cycle of violence. Okay, so there is tension building. And so when the tension is building, it's stressful, right? And so the batterer, the abuser, yells, curses, they may drink, abuse drugs or alcohol, they isolate the victim, and they keep them away from their friends and family. The victim's response is they attempt to be calm, they try to avoid any conflict, they cook, favorite dinner, they keep the children quiet. A lot of times too, there's a lot of shame or fear as well in this particular tension building phase, because maybe they are with this partner and the family didn't approve, or they ran away from home to be with this partner, and so they feel that, okay, my family won't take me back, right? So there's a lot that goes along with this. So the tension building phase, now they have to, the victim has to walk on eggshells. Don't say anything that can trigger them. into what's the next phase is explosion. So during the explosion, this perpetrator, the abuser, can verbally attack, hit, choke, maybe use weapons, beats, rapes the victim. The victim tries to protect themselves, protect their children. They may call the neighbor, police. And I'm going to tell you, as a police officer responding to a domestic violence call, that's got to be scary because you never know what to expect, right? It could be a minor disagreement, right? Maybe there was just some yelling and the neighbors called the police, or it could turn out into a full-blown shootout, right? With a murder-suicide kind of scenario. So that's something that could be really scary as a police officer or first responder. All right, so in this explosion, the victim tries to protect themselves, the children, they may call the police again, they may leave, they may fight back, okay? Then the cycle continues. There's an absence of tension or honeymoon phase. The batterer or the abuser will say, I'm sorry. And like the video that we saw in the beginning, they may receive flowers. They may receive chocolates. That's one of the things that in Julia Roberts' movie, Pretty Woman, the abuser gave her flowers, bought her nice gifts, showered her with love and affection after they were battered, after the explosive phase. So during this absence of tension or honeymoon phase, right, the victim may say, okay, I'm going to agree to stay. They may stop, pressing charges. They may say, okay, let's go to counseling. They may feel happy and hopeful, and they may resist intervention and help. Now, this is my personal opinion, right? So you can take it or leave it. Something just because what I've seen in life and I have experienced in my own life and what I saw growing up, once an individual is an abuser, a batterer, that trend will probably continue, And the advice I would give to a friend is if you get into that situation once, leave immediately because it tends to escalate. Am I saying that people can't change? No, that people can change, right? But really looking out for the safety and well-being of an individual, I would advise to get out, especially if there's no children involved. Now, that's just my personal opinion. That's not an NCLEX nugget, but that's just my personal opinion, okay? Because once somebody shows you who they are, you should believe them. You really should believe them. Okay. All right. Let us continue. Okay. So how do we intervene with this kind of crisis? Okay. Well, we want this individual that is being victimized, we want them to, and let me go back for a second, we want them to understand what is happening because sometimes individuals may be in denial, they may not understand what is happening. Okay, so we have to look at the present situation and then we have to try to resolve it. Now, if there's immediate danger, so if there's, immediate wounds that we have to deal with, lacerations, the patient is hemorrhaging, those are the things that we deal with first. We always look at Maslow's hierarchy. So we also want to treat the patient and let them know what's a healthy kind of relationship. And we're providing information. We're not telling them that they must leave, but we're providing them with information. We're providing them with coping strategies, providing them with resources. Okay, that's really important. Okay. So crisis intervention, and I kind of talked about being careful how you give information to patients because their abuser may see that information and that could turn into another incident. Okay, so let me go back for 1 second. I want to talk about the different kinds of crises. Okay, so psychological crisis is different from stress and anxiety. Okay, so if a person has a crisis, they're not able to control the situation, they're not able to function, carry out their ADLs, okay, their activities of daily living. there is a huge state of dysfunction. So there's different kinds of crises. So a developmental crisis may occur at a predictable time period in an individual's life, which is related to maturational changes, like teenage life, like midlife or old age crisis. So these kind of developmental changes that happen, okay? The other type is a situational crisis. It's unpredictable and without warning, such as a fatal illness, diagnosis, plane crash, natural disaster, or sudden death. Thoughts are dismantled and behavior changes in response to these crises, these situations. Okay, people may become confused, they may be feeling helpless, lost, and are easily angered and agitated. So, an important thing to note is that disorganization may result from an unrealistic perception of a threatening event, lack of a support system, or an inadequate coping ability. So really important for us as nurses to help our patients develop coping strategies, coping skills. That's really, really important. When we think about crisis intervention, we're going to get into suicide. Again, we do have a suicide hotline. Patients are able to reach out for support from that suicide hotline. And it is, I want to make sure I give the right number, is I believe 998. The individuals are able to reach out. There's also a chat function. Someone can chat, right? Text. Again, it's 988. 988 is the suicide crisis lifeline. 988, and that is something that's relatively new. Okay, so when we think about suicide, it's the 12th leading cause of adult death in the United States. Okay, so approximately 11 attempts for each one that ends in death. Okay, so it's pretty serious. So we have to think about males and older adults are more likely to have attempts that end in death than females and youth. That is a big NCLEX concept that you'll probably see in your assignments or maybe even on the NCLEX or on an exam. Males and older adults are more likely to have attempts that end in death than females and youth. Firearms, suffocation, and poisoning tend to be the most common methods used. Okay, so firearms, suffocation, and poisoning tend to be the most common methods used. A familial history of mental disorders is shown to increase the risk for suicidal behaviors. So what are some of the risk factors for a patient with suicide? Well, if they've had a previous suicide attempt, if they have a mental illness like depression, if they have substance use disorder, family history of suicide, if they have chronic pain, military service, serious illness, hopelessness, financial, criminal, or legal problems, or bullying. Again, these are all risk factors associated with suicide. Protective factors against suicide, if they have access to mental health care and if they're proactive about their mental health. And when I say protective factors, these are factors that can help the patient not go down the path of suicide. If they feel connected to family and friends and community, that's a protective factor. If they have less access to a lethal means, okay, if they may have cultural and religious beliefs that discourage suicidal behavior. If a patient has a strong sense of purpose and self-esteem, again, this is a protective factor. Okay, let's talk about suicidal ideation. Okay, so a verbalized thought or an idea that indicates the person's desire to do self-harm or destruction is a suicidal ideation. Okay, so they may have recurrent thought process that that come into their mind because of mental anguish, physical anguish. Okay, now the patient that says, okay, I planned this, I have a plan, this is a statement of intent, this is a suicidal threat. Okay, suicidal threat. Again, a statement of intent is considered a suicidal threat. Okay, and this is usually accompanied by changes and lets you know that someone may be suicidal. Okay, now action indicates the patient may be ready to carry out the plan, and this is a suicidal gesture. If the person actually carries out a suicide attempt, it is possible that they will succeed. Okay, so here's some of the warning signs. If they're talking about suicide, expressing feelings that life is not worth living or being a burden, difficulty eating and sleeping, increased substance use, social withdrawal, loss of interest in school, work, or pleasure activities, giving away prized possessions, if they've had a previous suicide attempt, unnecessary risk-taking, recent major loss, if they're preoccupied with death and dying, if they have a lack of attention to personal hygiene. Again, those were all suicide warning signs. If you think someone might be suicidal, what should you do? Okay, what should you do? You never leave the person alone. You stay with them. You ask them directly if they are planning to harm themselves. I know that we never want to quote unquote confront a patient, but this is the one time that you will ask them directly. You will confront them. You will take it very seriously. Tell the individual that you care about them. Don't debate with them. Don't try to give advice. Call 911 if you're not in a healthcare setting, right? Remove any potential weapons, so firearms, knives, potential things that could be used as poison, over the counter prescription or over the counter medications, prescription medications. You want to remove all of those things. If it's in a clinical hospital setting and we set a suicide watch, the patient's room will have nothing but the bed, a mattress, any strings, any call bells will be removed. The patient's belt will be removed, like, belt that they use to keep their pants up, right? All of those things, anything that could be used to harm themselves will be removed. When they get dinner, they will have plastic utensils. They will not have regular utensils. So this is pretty significant. And if the patient is on suicide watch, every 15 minutes, well, somebody's going to be with them and stay at their side until they're off of suicide watch. And every 15 minutes, we must document what the patient is doing, what's their state of mind. And if they even have to go to the toilet, we will go with them. We don't leave them alone. Okay, that's really important to note. Okay, and we are going to continue to evaluate this patient. Okay, so we want to make sure that we focus on safety. So this is a big NCLEX concept, and the family member is not okay to leave the patient with. It has to be someone that is a part of the staff. I'm not saying that the family member can't be there, right? But the staff, a member of the staff has to stay with the patient. Okay, that's really, really important to note. Okay, all right, let's take a look at, actually, before we talk about the questions, I think I mentioned suicide, to prevent suicide. Something that you should be aware of, if the patient is also giving away their personal belongings. If they have things that are very special to them and they say, okay, I'm going to give you this special watch. It belonged to my grandmother. It really means a lot to me. That's a red flag. If you have a patient that's taking antidepressive medication and they suddenly feel really happy and they get a burst of energy, that could be a red flag, because they could say, you know what, now I've got the energy to go through with my plan. Now, if you ask the patient and they say, yes, I'm thinking of committing suicide, the next thing you have to ask is, do you have a plan? Now, you're always going to take them seriously, but you also have to look at, okay, the degree of seriousness. If a patient, for example, she's an 81-year-old woman that's bedridden and she says, yes, I have a plan, I'm going to jump out the window. If she can't walk, that's probably not a plan that she's going to be able to follow up on, right? However, you still want to take her seriously, okay? And you will not leave that patient alone. Something else that's important, you may find that there are no-kill or no self-harm contracts. And those are contracts that the patient will sign saying that during this shift, they will not harm themselves. The other thing that's in that no harm or no kill contract is, okay, what should I do if I start to feel like I'm suicidal, right? Who are the people that I can reach out to if I start to feel like I'm going down this kind of slope? Okay, so I'm gonna bring one of these. So it could be a no kill, no harm contract, no suicide contract, but the idea is the same. So this is a contract, and okay, if they, breach this, you can't sue them, but it's something to let the patient know, number one, we care about you, we want you to stay alive, and these are the resources that are available to you if you start to go down that path of thinking about committing suicide. Okay, so it could be a no kill, no harm contract, no suicide contract. Okay, and so you can see it has points of contact, it has a suicide crisis hotline, and it is signed by the patient and by the witness. A lot of times the witness will be us as the nurse. Okay, all right, so let's continue and look at our questions. Okay, question number 1. An emotion triggered in response to threats, insulting situations, or anything that seriously hampers the intended actions of an individual is A, frustration, B, suicidal ideation, C, anger, or D, personality. Take a moment to pause and answer this question. All right, the correct answer is C, anger. Anger is an emotion triggered in response to threats, insulting situations, or anything that seriously hampers the intended actions of an individual. Okay. All right, question number 2. Tell whether the following statement is true or false. Empirical evidence to support a link between violent video games and violent crimes is abundant. Take a moment, pause the video, and think about your answer. Is this true or false? Empirical evidence supports a link between violent video games and violent crimes, and it's abundant. It's actually false. The empirical evidence to support a link between violent video games and violent crimes is scarce. That's according to what the evidence says, okay? Do I advocate young children partaking in violent video games? Personally, no, I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. Of course, that's going to be up to the individual's parents, but it kind of, in a sense, normalizes violence and they become numb to it. But again, for NCLEX purposes and testing purposes, this was false. Okay, that concludes our questions. Thank you very much for your attention. And again, remember the resources that are available to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you for your attention. And remember to always think like a nurse.